Yes, it's What a Boast, a celebration of Reeves and Mortimer. Please welcome your hosts for this podcast, MJ Price and Paula Wiseman.
Hello and welcome to Quite a Boast, a podcast dedicated to the work and genius of Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer. My name is Matt Price, founder of the Reeves and Mortimer Depository of Curious Stuff Facebook group.
And I am Paula Wiseman, founder and creator of the Divine Comedians podcast.
We are joined today by a journalist and author who began his career writing for music periodicals such as Sounds and The Enemy, where he fully embraced the perks of the rock and roll lifestyle. In the mid-90s, he reinvented the men's magazine with the launch of the infamous Loaded. His recent autobiography, Animal House, contains numerous tales of his adventures and misadventures throughout the years, featuring an epic cast of larger-than-life characters from Marky Smith to Rod Stewart, Liz Hurley to Ronnie Biggs, and Helen Mirren to the justified ancients of Moo Moo. The book also tells of his several shenanigans alongside Jim and Bob, with whom he has had a professional and personal relationship ever since they first arrived on the comedy scene. Please enter the Novelty Island paddock, James Brown.
Hey James.
Hi there. I've actually been in Novelty Island on stage.
Yeah.
On a tour. I can't remember what tour it was, but and also in the book, which I edited, The Big Night In.
Yeah.
If anybody has that, I'm one of the Novelty Island characters on the spread of various performers, stompers.
Oh, you're a stomper.
A stomper, yeah.
I was a stomper.
So how did it all start for you, James? Like the journalism journey, was it a natural path? Was it something you always wanted to do? Were you always writing?
For me, or for my connection with Vic and Bob?
Just in general.
Just in general.
Well, yeah. When I was at school, I guess when I was at school, I was really into music. I wasn't much into doing homework or anything like that. And when I found the music papers, so the first ones I read would be Enemy and Sounds, and then Smash Hits came out not long after that, I guess about 1978, 79 or 80 or something like that. I started reading that because it wasn't just lyrics. I mean, lyrics were brilliant because you could cut them out and stick them in your record sleeves.
Yeah.
But it was like a kind of a glossy kid brother to The Enemy, and then I found fanzines, sort of home-produced little post-punk magazines, and I thought, I could do one of these. And that's all I really wanted to do. You know, I was quite idealistic. You know, I figured it'd either be leading some sort of political revolution. My football career wasn't going to take off because I never ate any vegetables or meat. I was incredibly skinny, and I couldn't sing, even though people asked me to be in their bands. So that was it, really. My dad was a writer, so I'd see a lot of writing, and the house had a lot of books. And that was it, really. I started, when I found fanzines, I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And then I just started trying to submit articles for The Enemy and Sounds and so on. And somebody gave me a break at Sounds. And then from there, I got hired by The Enemy. They actually came and offered me a job because of what I was writing about. And that was that, really. It was, I mean, it sounds easy, but it was a lot of many years of just going out with a bag of 30 fanzines, maybe selling 8 and coming home with £1.60. The invention of the 20p piece was a major breakthrough for my trouser pockets because I could be coming home with 121 p's and 2p. At that point, people used to give me their change just to piss off from bothering them. I was quite a persistent salesperson, but I loved doing that, and it kind of gave me a voice. And then when I started reading The Enemy, I realized that the people there were a little bit like I was, very full of themselves, convinced that they knew best about music. And that's just really where I wanted to be. And so it was unbelievable when they actually came and offered me a job. And then, so that's what I was doing. That's how I got started.
So it's like late 80s, something like that?
Yeah, that would be, I started writing for Sounds about 85, 86, and then 87, I got approached and I joined Enemy in the summer of that year. And we were talking, weren't we, about the earliest pieces, and I can't remember when you would know more than me, probably being expert, when they were doing their run at Albany Empire.
Yes, so I'm going to say about 87, 88. Well, 80 into 89 Albany Empire. Before that, it was the Goldsmith Tavern, actually.
Yeah, it wouldn't be
Yeah.
87.
So it would have been 89, 88, 89, yeah.
So I think, what happened was there was a guy called Ted, who was a music PR, Ted Cummins. His brother was Dave Cummins. He was in the Commotions, and I think
right.
he was in Delamitri, and Dave was friends with Jim and Bob and some of those guys. He was a comedy writer as well with Harry Enfield and friends. And Ted said, my brother told me to see this great guy. You'll love him. Let's go and see him. So we went down to the Albany Empire, which, the music business tended to revolve around gigs in the center of London, from, Brixton up to Tufnell Park and across to really around the Northern Line, really just straight up. So the idea of going to Deptford just seemed like the middle of nowhere. I think I'd been down to the same venue to see Jerry Sadowitz, who I really liked Jerry, and he'd taken me to see a young guy called Jack D, who had six people. He had six people playing in front, and then he was so funny. We at the Crown and the Hen and Chickens, or the Hen and Chickens in Highbury, and he was brilliant. And Jerry said, "Come see this guy; it's really funny. You'll like him." So we went to see Jack D, and then he was so funny. Well, I just went back the next night, and there were 11 people, and so basically,
I spoke to Jack recently on the podcast.
Yeah, well, the reason I mention that is because then Ted took me. I saw Jack and I saw the Big Night Out very close to each other. And what happens with the NME was the first issue of the year was always really quiet because nobody released records around January the 1st.
Yeah.
Because they thought everybody had spent their money over Christmas. So it was quite a dead time. So for the paper, it would be a good time to put maybe a collection of new bands on. And I quite like doing a little bit of work between Christmas and New Year. I mean, I was a long way from my family and things, and so it was quite a good time to get space for give smaller acts bigger space. And so after I went down with Ted Cummins to see the Big Night Out, and I just thought it was amazing. And one of the first things that caught me was I really liked the Human League. When I was a kid, they were one of my you have your bands that you like, and predating them doing the brilliant pop album Dare, the earlier albums before they split and the musicians went to form Heaven 17. I really liked it, and what I noticed is that even before Jim and Bob and the cast of characters, because it was very much even though they were Jim was the ringmaster, Bob was the supporting character. It was a huge ensemble. There was about 7 or 8 other people coming on stage with them, and so before they came on stage, Travelogue was playing by the Human League, which was really out of time. It wasn't anything that was being particularly there wasn't. It was too close for it to be nostalgic. It was just like really unexpected. So I thought, that's interesting. And then I saw this amazing show, really funny. I'd never seen anything like it. And if you think about the sort of the things that had come before that were sort of in that era, performative surrealism, you think about Monty Python, or you think about Spike Milligan and
the Goons.
They were all kind of little, they were little sketches or little scenes. This was just one big, insane gang show, sort of. And Jim being the sort of circus master and the star, and Bob at that point was very much the supporting act. The number 2.
Yeah,
I mean, it really was. I mean, one of the best things they did was I went. By the way, then I went back for the Till Arrestor run. I went like 2 or 3 more times. They played every Sunday for about a month or something, and but they did. I don't know if they ever did this on TV, but they did Eric and Ernie, and Bob would come out at the end, and he would. I remember him doing Rick Astley.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if he did other people. I know he did people later on the show where he impersonated Peter Gabriel and people, but
Yeah.
doing Rick Astley, and quite a good impression of him. And then what was brilliant was the arrival. The curtains just opened, and Jim just stepped out, looking just like Eric Morecambe, and he had the impression down. I mean, it was the only thing that they did that was obviously borrowed from elsewhere, and so that it was just fantastic. But what I really liked was they knew what was going on in terms of the running order, but it was so kind of free that it looked like it was just total and utter chaos. But they obviously had a running order of all these different things, like celebrity lookalikes. But obviously none of them. There's a guy called Kingy who used to have spoons and things dropping out of his pockets. Was a big awkward-looking guy, and then there was the Toff Dorian. I don't know if you've had him on.
Yeah, we have. Yeah.
And Dorian was quite a big part because he also originally did the dog, Greg
Mitchell.
Yeah,
Glenn Mitchell. And then so Dorian would play the Toff, and everybody would scream for him to get off. And it was just brilliant. It was like it was at a point where the audience that were going knew enough of the key people on it to react like a pantomime.
Yeah.
And I remember the first night I went looking around, and Jules Holland was there, and Jonathan Ross was there, and I think maybe Alan Mark was there. Like not Alan Mark, the what's the guy called? Michael Grade might have been there.
Alan Yentop.
Yeah, there were really big media people there, but you know, at this point I was about 22, and I had my ear very much to the ground all the time for new and emerging sort of mainly musical talent. But like I'd said, you know, I've been to see Jerry Sadowitz there, and Enemy was open. We'd put Harry Enfield on the Christmas cover. I'd interviewed him when he had loads of money. So comedy was sort of part of the remit, but nobody had written about these guys. You know, it was like one of those, I guess it was like when Guns N' Roses arrived, and they were, to their audience, they were already huge, but the media hadn't gone near them. And it remained like that for a long, long time. Nobody would go to Deptford.
Yeah.
And I think Bob, I haven't read all of Bob's autobiography. He sent me a manuscript in advance, and I read it 3/4 of it in the bath until the bath was freezing. I thought it was so good. And I was messaging him saying, have you written this yourself? And apparently I finished just before he said something nice about my championing. And then, because I just got to a point when the bath was so cold, I had like 3 hours reading it. But you know, so I wrote this piece, a double-page spread called "Far from the Manning Crowd," and there was a great picture of Jim on a motorbike that was taken at Helicon Mountain by I think Derek Ridges, which is where I'd gone and interviewed them. I'd gone backstage after. I'm getting ahead here.
No,
I'd gone backstage at the end of that first performance, which I was wont to do with bands, you know, if I like bands. Because also it was quite nice saying, I'd like to put you in the Enemy, because if you put somebody on the cover of the Enemy, or if you got a single of the week or a great live review, it genuinely changed the status of a band.
Oh, 100%.
And so to go backstage and say, look, and introduce myself to Jim, and the two things that struck me was he had a tailor-made suit on, which you didn't see a lot of, you know, I mean, the sort of bands I hung around with, no one had even an off-the-peg suit, never mind a tailor-made suit. And he had a checkbook with Vic Reeves' Big Night Out, and he was writing checks and giving them to the people who'd appeared that night. You know, I don't know what it'd be, like 20, I don't know what he paid them, but he was paying the guys who'd been, you know, been on stage, like Dorian and co. And I just told, you know, I said, oh, I noticed you had Travelogue on. He said, oh yeah, I love the Human League. So I went down and interviewed them. And I wrote a piece about them, and I interviewed Jack D as well. I can't remember where I interviewed Jack. Maybe I went to his house down in Tooting or something like that, or Balham. And I don't know who wrote the headline, but it was a brilliant headline. The subs wrote "Far from the Manning Crowd," and it was a big double-page spread. And so Bob mentions that, I think, in his book. But what was interesting was in terms of who did better out of that piece. Because Jonathan Ross already knew about Jim and Bob, and I'd interviewed him for Sounds like about 1.5 years before, 2 years before, whatever, when the Last Resort first started, he called me up. He said, James, that guy that you interviewed alongside Jim and Bob, is he really like Dave Allen? And I said, yeah, he is. because if you think the time we're talking about, Vic and Bob were like no other comedians that are around, and Jack D was like no other comedians, because
Yeah.
comedians at the time were tending to still be sort of in Ben Elton's shadow of being, the gist is we're anti-Thatcher, and that's what a lot of the. I remember seeing Alan Davis around this a little bit after this, a couple of years later, and he was doing jokes about nuclear-free zones, and thank God for that, because I didn't want to have a Polaris submarine in the high street in Hackney. So there was that sense of that's what alternative comedy was. So to see this guy who also had a suit on and who was being quite cynical and very funny in Jack, and then these two fucking clowns basically with his fantastic stage show, and he put them on, and Jonathan said, "Is he really as good? Is he like Dave Allen?" I said, "Yeah, he's really funny. He's like he looks like a comedian used to look like, but his jokes are really funny, and they kind of." He's very cynical. He said, "Oh, great." He said, I'm covering for Wogan next week. I'm going to get him on."
Oh, wow.
And I'm actually thinking about it. Maybe Jack ended up with Off the Curb. Maybe that's how he got signed by Off the Curb. But so yeah, that was that. And that was the start of it. And then I started taking other people down from the NME saying, "You've got to see these guys. They're amazing." And then the deputy editor, he saw them and he said, "Oh yeah, this is great," and he wanted to do them. So then he went, let me put him on Jim on the cover. Yeah, so that would have been.
That was May 1990. Vic Reeves is Britain's Funniest Man.
Yeah, so I would say that I probably saw those shows in December '89, or November or December '89, and the piece would have run something like January the 4th or something like that, 90. And then I took them again when they started doing some more shows, and Jim and I just became friends. I mean, I'd see them about a lot, and I did their book with a guy called Andy Darling, who they also knew. They got offered a book deal, but there wasn't much space for the pages in between. I don't know why, but I think it was a company called Fantail. I don't know why the editor. It was a really thin book.
Yeah.
And I said, "What? Give me more pages." So we went. Andy and I went down to meet them in Helicon Mountain, and they just had boxes and boxes of scripts and drawings, and we took lots of them out and printed them. And I think I told you when we were chatting that I found some of them recently. I knew that I had some because when I moved house, I found some, but I found them recently. And actually, what they are, there's a few of Jim's drawings of things like Graham Lister's brain and things, and some little sketches of what was going to be on the Man with the Sticks hat. But the thing that I'm going to send to Bob, which there were loads of, was his scripts for Judge Nutmeg. Wow. And they were really. I mean, Bob, given how famous he is now, could probably just put them out as a book because they were really, really funny. I don't know how they were friends, how they knew him, but yeah. So I came up with the idea of calling the book "The Big Night In." That seemed obvious, and I don't think there was enough of a book there for it to warrant selling a lot of copies. I never understood why, given the cost of generating the content was relatively low, because they had all of these drawings and handwritten scripts, why the publishers didn't give it more pages. And then I just hung out with him a lot more. And then Jim had this amazing flat in Greenwich. And when he met his new girlfriend, Sarah, he bought a house and he started making a lot more money doing the shows. He bought a house in Blackheath and I moved into his flat. He said, "Do you want to rent my flat off me?" So I moved into that flat. So all of that time that I was building up to the launch of Loaded, that's where I was living in Greenwich in Jim's flat, and I would see him a lot. He was pretty much the person I spent most time with around that time. And so I think I wrote a little bit about what we would get up to in Animal House. But I've got loads more. I'm going to write another book. I've got loads more that we accidentally went on holiday together in Los Angeles. They were there for some meetings and I bumped into them. I was on a job there. I'm going to write about that in my next book. That was very funny. So that was it, really. Jim had this kind of ready-made gang of friends called the Darlow Mafia, which were his mates from art school and then just from back home and from Greenwich. And I think he'd been kind of that sort of that sort of, I don't know, comedy around up the creek. You know, there was a big kind of comedy scene there, and boys wander sort of around, and
Mm.
you know, there was this sort of scene that he was very much a part of in Greenwich. So that was that really. That were my earliest encounters with. But we just got on. What I liked about them both was they were like some of my friends from school.
Yeah.
You know, I'd moved to London in about 1985, 86, and I didn't really know many people who were like who had the same sort of humour or the same sort of perspective, even the same voices.
Yeah.
So some of the, you know, the sort of language that they used, both of them used, was the same language. I don't mean like bad language, but just the terminology
Yeah.
and the phrases and the things that I'd grown up talking and using at school in Leeds.
You mentioned to me previously to make sure that you talk about the sleeping bag on stage incident. Would that have been that sort of time when you went on tour with them?
Later, there is another cover that we did where I went on the road.
Oh,
No,
hang on. Where is it? I've got it here.
it's a
Somewhere.
green cover.
I've got that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the cover line? The road
Reeves
to
Mortimer, The Road to Bradford,
And when is
exclusive.
that? What year is that?
That's December 91.
Okay, so if you think about that, that's pretty much 2 years from when I've first seen them.
Yeah.
And they were just getting bigger and bigger. And they went on a big tour with a big bus. And it was interesting at this point because they were famous.
Mm.
And it was having a peculiar impact on people around them more than them. They had a really big bus. At each, I mean, they were huge. They were like so popular. And I'll give you some examples. They were the thing about the sleeping bag is when they played De Montfort Hall in Leicester, they said Brownie, get on the stage in a sleeping bag for the whole show. So I just lay on the stage at the front of this enormous venue in Leicester, watching the show from in front of Jim's desk to the side of his desk, just in a sleeping bag watching the show. That was funny. And then and like Simon Day was there as Tommy Cockles, and also he used to come on with a sort of a red curly wig on, pretending it was like an Irish baby or something, riding a tricycle round.
Cheesy. That was.
Yes, so Simon was really. I mean, it sounds strange, but Simon was the entertainer of the tour. Simon would keep everybody laughing on the bus. But when I say it was interesting how it affected people, I forget the name of the guy that played Les.
Fred Aylward.
Mm.
Fred had his own dressing room.
Yeah.
He insisted on his own dressing room.
Yeah, we've had Fred on telling us some stories.
But it was, I mean, I'd obviously been around a lot of bands, some who were very famous, some that were becoming famous, and some that were never going to be famous. And you very quickly learn about the dynamics of the band. And I could see this was a problem. And it was like he was disentangling himself from them.
Right.
You know, if you imagine a rope fraying, but he seemed to be cutting the rope himself by insisting on his own dressing room, because I think he thought, I mean, nowadays, when you look at Jim doing his art and he's very funny, almost obviously Vic Reeves style Instagram posts, dancing with his wife, Nancy, and so on. Then you see Bob doing his, you know, sort of killing and winning all these comedy shows and obviously doing the fishing show and becoming hugely famous without making any effort. Nobody would know who Les was, apart from probably people who watched, you know, ardent fans. So that was quite unusual being there, seeing this. I mean, he probably sees it different, but I was seeing it how they were seeing it. They would just thought it was, I think they knew it meant that he would disappear from their world because they invented their own people. You know, I remember they came and reviewed the NME singles with me one time. They sat in the editor's office and I interviewed them. We played the records and I interviewed them. And I think that was then. It was either then or when we were doing the book. They went on this whole thing about Graham Lister, Bob's character, you know, the Karen before a Karen, you know, and they could just invent characters and they could just sit there and make all of this. There was no prep. It wasn't like they just fired off each other. They were like a match and a firelighter. you didn't need anything else to get the fire going, just the two of them.
Yeah.
And that's what was brilliant about them. They enjoyed talking to each other. And the more they spoke to each other, the greater the picture they came. And there were no limits. There were no, I've never really written about this, I've never really written about them in depth since then. And at the time, I was writing about the excitement of seeing them, but I never really talked about what they were like. And they were, so the idea that somebody would voluntarily start like isolating within the broader camp and the broader sort of euphoria and success and the excitement was weird.
And I think by 91, so they've been doing it since late 80s. And the public, as you say, the public only just found out about it, the general public, but they were getting sick of it already and wanted to move on to the next thing. They were getting bored of shouting the same catchphrases every night. I think they were. So those, some people fell by the wayside.
Yeah, but I tell you, this is, I can't remember whether I wrote this in the book or whether I've ever put it anywhere else, but there wasn't, I'm sure some people watching this must have been there. On that tour, I went to Liverpool, Bradford, Leicester. If you get the tour dates, you're probably Sheffield as well. So I went about 4 nights. And in Liverpool, they did the gig at Liverpool University. And the dressing room was like a lecture, a classroom. It was actually quite like my school. It was like a big old red brick building, really massive, wide double windows on the floor. And when they did the show, everybody loved them. I mean, they were literally like, I don't know whether there'd be like 1,500 people in the room or whether it was even bigger. And they would be all chanting everything along. I mean, a bit like Steve Martin had been like that.
Yeah.
In America. And obviously the Blues Brothers had been like that. I don't think there'd been anything like that where there was such a call and response nature of probably since like Ken Dodd, So, but there hadn't been anything like that for a long time. No. I know that David Baddiel and Rob Newman had been big, but they were really just doing their quite polished, written out characters and sketches, and they'd become big. But the dressing rooms have got no curtains. There's hundreds of people walking past to get out of the campus. And we're sitting on the window ledges talking about the gig. And people starting to see that whoever it was, Jim or Bob, was sitting on the window ledges. And I said, they look at the people out, they look. And we opened the windows and Jim started talking to them. And the word went round and the kind of crowd reassembled. And honestly, I'm not talking about 30 people. There were hundreds of people. It looked like a sort of like when you did a general election and, there's somebody surrounded by like 400 people. There was this huge crowd. You couldn't see beyond where the people were. And they were just shouting, what's an end of your stick? What's an end of your stick? And both of them were hanging out the window. I don't know if they remember this, I don't know if you ever interviewed them, but it was brilliant. And it went on for about 40 minutes. It wasn't like, oh, hi guys, one catchphrase, see ya. Because they were at the point where this sense of euphoria about their success, because when they would do the big night out on television down in, I used to go down and see them, Wandsworth, I think it was, the television centre down there. It was wild and exciting, but there was about like 120 people in the crowd, if that, maybe 80 people. So to have a kind of a university-sized hall full of people, and they were both, certainly Jim was a massive music fan.
Yeah.
He was always playing fucking free and he loved the Fall and he loved his old 70s rock. And to be playing these venues, which are the sort of venues that they would have gone to in Middlesbrough or Darlington or wherever in the Northeast and watch bands, to be on stage doing those gigs and to be having people, they were excited still. It was a really exciting time. So that was my memory of the tour. And then the other thing was when we were in Leicester, they just discovered the bones of Richard I, I think. You know that story?
Yeah. The car park.
Did Steve Coogan make a film about it and they're now being sued by the professor? That had just been found not long before. So those photographs were taken in Leicester, I think. And again, I think it was Derek Ridges and I went on that tour bus and Simon writes about that in his book. Simon Day writes about that, because that was like, they were very good at finding strange new talent. If you think about, what's the guy with the big mad curly hair and the
Charlie Chuck.
Charlie Chuck.
Charlie, yeah.
They were brilliant, and Simon actually came with another guy, Mark
Swan.
Yes, Swanee. He had a fireplace shop in Greenwich, and Simon was a friend of Swanee's, but Swanee was a stomper. And then I think they noticed Simon because he was doing his Robert De Niro impression. I mean, I haven't really talked about this or thought about it for a long time, but I think that's how they find him. And they were just brilliant at saying, we've got to come with us. There was nobody. They had management, obviously, Peter Bennett Jones and Chiggy, but who were big comedy managers, but nobody was telling them what to do. It wasn't like a rock and roll band where the manager might be saying, let's get this producer or that. They were just like freestyling everything. Yeah. And there was no shortage. There was no shortage ever. And it wasn't until years later, maybe like 15 years ago, I saw them redo something. They did a little night at Madame Jojo's. And you could see Bob wasn't really enjoying it. But by then, they'd kind of like stopped doing that. But so that was, I never saw them disinterested. When you were saying they were getting tired of it, I never ever saw them disinterested in what they were doing, because they just were so well suited to like inspire each other. I love them.
Yeah.
You can tell just from the way that you talk about them.
Because Jim was like my mate, really. I mean, Bob would spend a lot of time with us as well. But Jim and I knocked around a real lot. I mean, if he had nothing to do, he'd ring me and I'd go over and we'd just get drunk in his house. Really, really, really drunk. And then when I started Loaded Eye and I was living in his flat, I said, why don't you do a column for me? Why don't you I'll come over. He said, oh, no, I don't know if I can write a column. I said, no, I'll come over. We'll put a tape recorder, we'll talk, and I'll turn it into a column. So we got a shot of him like looking like he was shooting a gun like that. And I wrote my favorite, I have loads of tiny little bits from Loaded. And I think hopefully people now realise the early years of Loaded, because of the documentary and so on, that are different to what those magazines became. But one of my favourite little things was I put Vic Reeves. I can't remember what the column was called, but it said Vic Reeves, columnist of the year, 1897. Like that. He was like, 1684 or something like that. And he would just sit and talk utter fucking gobbledygook. But lots of the observations were really good. He talked about lads on estates who walked around like that, like kind of hard. He said like they were carrying loads of boxes of eggs. I still remember stuff like that. Or T-shirts that would say Wyoming Bike Chick Fest, or that period when everybody's T-shirts seemed to be about Americana, and they'd have a, Wyoming Tarp Fest 18044. And his eye for like kind of seeing the world through his own filter was brilliant, and that literally was it. I just used to go down and sit in his back garden in Blackheath and talk to him for an hour, and then go away and type that up. And later, I think it was Michael Holden, who was the junior writer on Loaded. He took over from me. But what was curious about that was he didn't want paying in money. He wanted me to get him wine. And I said, yeah, that would be no problem. And then retrospectively, what I realized I just should have done was I should have just gone to the off license or Victoria Wines and set up a standing order.
Yeah.
Loaded credit card. And that would have been just easy. I'd have just handed in the, 180 quid for 12 bottles, whatever it was, and said, wine, Vic Reeves column, and sent it off. But the IPC, who were a really big staid corporate company, said that they would procure the wine through their catering department because they'd get a better deal. And it took them fucking ages. And it's the only time Jim ever got annoyed with me, because he was doing these columns and he took about 6 months to get the first crates of wine. It was Cloudy Bay Sauvignon Blanc or Chablis or something like that. And but so that was it. We paid him in wine.
He did a cover for an Kaiser Chiefs album recently, and he wanted paying in sweets for that one. So he's changed.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, Gazza was like that as well. We got an interview with Gazza, who didn't really do many interviews at the time. He was just about to join Rangers, and his agent one of the Loaded guys had a sideline in teaching kids table tennis. He said, "Hey, I'm doing Gaz's agent's son." I said, "Ask him if we can get an interview." So he said, "Look, I also work on this magazine. Do you think we could interview Gaz?" And he said, "I'll ask him." He said, "The best way to pitch it is, can you offer him something? Because he's got loads of money. He won't make any difference." I said, "What like?" He said, "Well, I've got some videos." So we got 50 children's videos for his kids. Gaza was fucking delighted. Couldn't do enough for the interview. When the interviewer got to, they interviewed him on pre-season tour of Sweden. When he got there, Gaza introduced John, who wasn't even that into football really. He introduced him to all of the Rangers players. He goes, "This is the guy that's getting me the videos for Reeves." And Jim was like that. He really liked being paid in wine, and he had a great wine cellar. Roland Rippon and I once locked ourselves in on purpose with a bottle opener.
Talking about Loaded, we spoke to Simon Day, and he said that at the time you told him you didn't quite know what the magazine would be about, but all you knew that it wouldn't be full of adverts for shoes.
Well, probably, yeah, because it wasn't. Again, it's nice to be able to talk about this because Loaded was genuinely different. It was refreshing. It wasn't the magazines that had come for men beforehand in England were all about, and two of them were American, GQ and Esquire. They're all about men improving themselves, and wearing suits. And their icons were like kind of people like Brian Ferry or Richard Rogers, the architect. It was all about style and presentation. And I wanted a magazine that was about experience and that was funny. Because also this was another thing. I was pitching interviews with Dennis Leary, Vic and Bob, Jack D, amongst other articles to Arena, which was the one that I liked, and they didn't want them.
Wow.
So having left the NME, I didn't really have anywhere to write about the things and the people I loved. So when they offered me the chance to create my own magazine, it was just obvious that. And I think, if I think back, I edited 36 issues over 3 years, and we had Jack D. I think Jim and Bob definitely on the cover once, maybe twice. Frank Skinner was on once on his own, and once with David Baddiel. Dennis Leary was on the cover. Martin Clunes wasn't a comedian, but he was a comedy actor. He was on the cover. Steve Coogan as Paul Calf was on the very first dummy. So that's 7 out of 37 issues if you include the dummy. And there was Jenny Eclair edited an issue. So it was a really rich period of time to be writing about television. Mainly these people that establish themselves on TV as well as live. I mean, it's different now because the new generation of comedians, they don't need TV. They don't need to go on, "Have I got news for you?" or whose line is it anyway, whatever. I mean, obviously there are those programs on Friday night, like 9 out of 10 Cats and so on. But the guys that I know now have huge Instagram followings, and they just do their own Instagram, and they do their live shows, and they do those group live shows where they get loads of different people on. So, but this was the era when they had to be on television to make money, I think.
Those different times, wasn't it? There was no internet, there was no social media back then. It benefited, I suppose, from not having those things.
I was at their place going through boxes of scripts for their book, and they were writing an advert for Boast. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Slightly rippled with a flat underside.
Yeah.
They were writing that and reading it out to me, and you couldn't believe how simple it was. They basically had to write 6 boxes. It would be 6 shots and 2 lines in each box, to shot 1, shot 2, shot 3, shot 4, shot 5. That's it, payoff. Yeah. I can remember what they told me, what they were getting. They couldn't believe it. I mean, it wasn't 6 figures, but it was a lot of money they were getting for 4 days in Spain. It's really nice talking about this because, like I said, I've never talked about it, and it was great being around them because what I was talking about, Fred, about you could see that division come in there. A lot of bands before they even got famous had difficulties. Especially if they'd been around for a long time, or bands that had been kids together. They got divisions and then when fame attached, people would either spin out in drugs or the homesickness of being abroad, or like rivalries about who should get the most attention, or even just things like who was getting the money for the songwriting. So it was quite. I've seen bands punching each other in the face, and having rows and so on. But with Jim and Bob, it was just fun. It was brilliant fun. They were brilliant to be around. And I think the only time when it got a little bit difficult was when Jim got, when they got, I mean, Jim more than Bob, because of things like, the Enemy cover, which, I wouldn't have shot just Jim on his own. I would have shot them both together. And I think Bob talks in his book, doesn't he, that the guy came on and said they didn't want to talk to Bob, which was just, that guy didn't really know what he was doing. With that story. So, but I remember being out with Jim, and it started to get to a point where and this sounds bonkers, but he kind of needed a bodyguard, because you'd go out, he'd get mobbed. We'd go out quietly to just some bars, and you'd go in somewhere just for a drink, and there'd be like 10 people would want an autograph, and then the 11th person would want to challenge him, like, oh, go on then, be funny. There was this sort of resentment about the fame and the success. I remember one night thinking, I'm going to have to lamp this guy. And this guy's much bigger than me and Jim, but I'm going to have to distract him. It was Sunday night in Soho, and it was like, we were in Covent Garden. But so there were little moments like that when they were genuinely really, really famous, that they would attract lots of positive attention, but they started to, and I think that's why they ended up spending a lot of the time with a lot of other famous people in the Groucho Club.
Groucho, yeah.
That's why people kind of headed in there, because even though it was lovely for people to come up and say, I love your program, I love your record, I love you, whatever, it was the one person that came along, usually at least one a night, who was a fucking pain. That's why famous people retreat. Because not because of the 20 fans that are really nice. Okay, one of them might ask for an autograph when something's going on in the family or whatever, and that puts them off. But there'd be one fucking idiot who just resents the fame and the attention. So it was exciting though. It was genuinely like, and there was so much going on. I used to go to the recordings of those shows, the Channel 4 shows every week, and they were fun times to be around.
And Jim and Bob had you on their own radio show. There was Radio Reeves and Mortimer.
That's when I announced
just when Loaded came out. Yeah,
I announced Loaded on that.
You described it as a magazine for young hip cats on the rampage.
Yeah, I'm using ironic hipster speak there, but I didn't realise that until when I was doing. I should have mentioned that in my book. There were so many things I missed, but I found my wife left a box when we got divorced. She left a box with photographs in, and I was clearing all of these boxes out years later, like 20 years later. And like about 4 years ago, 4 years ago, when I was doing my book, I found her diary, and she said, James goes on Vic and Bob's show on Radio 1 and talks about his new magazine. And I'd forgotten that. That's where I'd mentioned it. And I think, again, does Bob mention that in his book? I saw some reference to that recently somewhere. But it was, they were just getting inundated with a lot of requests for things like that.
Yeah.
I'm really happy that they're both doing well again, because there was a time when I would go in and see Chiggy. When somebody who worked with them looked after when After Loaded was big, I get offered a lot of things as well. And I mainly had somebody just to say no. And I remember popping in to see Chiggy years later, and I said, what's going on with the boys? And she said, not much. They're not, there's not a great deal of, and it'd gone quiet for them. And I think Jim had itchy feet because he always likes to be doing things, but I think it suited Bob not doing much. I mean, he says, doesn't he, regularly on the fishing show, he doesn't really like doing anything.
Yeah, staying at home.
And and they're both happy doing.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd never seen fishing until October this last year. I think I'd briefly seen the one in Staithes with the singer from the Northeast, Chris. What is it?
Oh, Chris Rea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd briefly seen that when it was on live, but I think because I know Bob and Paul, I didn't, and I'm not really into fishing. I didn't feel compelled to watch it. I kind of felt like, well, I kind of know what this is going to be like. And then last autumn, I was sitting with my girlfriend, who also has no interest in fishing, and she's never had any urge to go and see any stand-up comedy, or she never said to me, oh, should we watch an old copy of Vic Reeves? I mean, she would have been like 6 when they were on the front of the enemy. But I said, should we just watch this? We were trying to find some neutral TV. I said, let's just watch this. She loved it. I don't think she'd really ever seen Bob in anything. And it just really nice to have that long seam of beautiful and gentle sort of, not reinvention, but sort of, self-presentation of what they were both like at this time in their lives, Paul and Bob.
Yeah.
Everybody who's been into that from the early years, tough shit. Like we've got like 2 or 3. I had to stop watching it. I said, I don't want to watch all of it. Let's save some of it. So I think there's 2 or 3 seasons left. We've just gone past the one where Lee Mack comes instead of Bob.
Oh yeah, infamous.
The controversial one.
It was fucking terrible, wasn't it? So lazy from the BB. I mean, I know what happened there. Bob's recommended they get Lee Mack.
Yeah.
That's why they've done it, because he doesn't fish and he doesn't eat fish.
He's a vegan.
He's a vegan who doesn't fish. I felt they would have been better getting somebody like a fisherman to go with, Paul, maybe, and somebody who's much loved, like David Seaman, the England goalkeeper.
Yeah.
Or even Gaza. I mean, Gaza's just like, it's insane. But, if they just had a sort of a fishing show, but that's where we've just gone past, that really beautiful looking hotel in Cornwall. And I love that. I love that program. I love seeing Jim on his Instagram because he looks like he's happy. And I go down to his art launches and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not far from where I am now. I've just cycled over from Ashford, and Jim gets his bike fixed at the other end of my road. So I very occasionally, I mean, there was a long time when we didn't really see each other, but mainly when I stopped drinking. I stopped drinking, and I put him on the cover of GQ about his art. It was really difficult when I went to GQ because nobody knew what the fucking magazine was. It was dying on its arse. It was selling like 57,000, 60,000 copies. I had to very hastily put some popular people on the cover. So I put Paul Whitehouse on the first one, and Jim and the Gallaghers, and just sort of younger people.
Yeah.
Because it was such a staid magazine. And I just said, Jim, you've never talked about your art. And I had some of his paintings and stuff. One time he'd actually asked me to get rid of 3 massive oil paintings for personal reasons. And I think I burnt. I remember thinking,
oh my God.
they were huge oil paintings. I can remember thinking, I know what was wrong with them. Somebody that he'd been involved with had an issue with one of the paintings.
Right.
Wow.
So they were personal relationship style things. There was nothing wrong with the nature of what was painted in them. And he said, can you get rid of these? I don't even know what I did with them. But it felt wrong getting rid of them, but they'd been ruined, they'd been. And so I knew that he had masses and masses of art, and nobody had ever seen it. And I said, can we do a cover just about your art? And that and the Paul Whitehouse covers were way ahead of the rest of the world catching up with that. But
didn't you give them an award on the inaugural GQ Awards when you joined them? I think you say it in the book.
Is that right? Did they get that? If that's
yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I more remember giving them to like Michael Caine and Tony Adams, people that I've not met before.
Yeah,
people whose house I hadn't.
Not your mates. Yeah.
Yeah.
People who I hadn't had breakfast with many times. So I mean, they were good then. If I ever needed something, they were good. I mean, I helped them become well known through Enemy, and then I guess Loaded, but mainly Enemy. And then later, if I needed them to do a cover, they would always say, "Yeah, we'll do that." So, and I think it was when I stopped drinking, I didn't see them so much anymore, really. But that was more just to do with me slightly changing where I was spending my time and what I was doing.
I don't know. I think you do change your circle. That you change your circle of friends, don't you? When stuff like that happens, I suppose.
I think I just needed to keep away from the grouch for a bit because it was just
bad influence.
It was the toilets were just full of cocaine, to be honest.
Oh my God!
And the bar was obviously full of the bar, and it was.
Yeah.
I probably needed to spend. Sort of out of harm's way. I'm not implying that they were doing drugs, but they both drank a lot. I would try and this is true, and I think I've written this down, and I'm not blaming them in any way because it was my choice, but probably the year before I eventually stopped drinking, every now and then I'd get like 30 days, just needed a break. And then Jim would say, "Do you want to come over? We're having some friends round." I'd drink 5 bottles of wine.
Oh my God.
I can remember when he moved to the country, going down to see him near Tenterden, which is again near here where I am, and now him dragging me out of his daughter's Wendy house by my ankles. I'd crawled in there to go to sleep. It was also, that was a strange time. There were a lot of people coming back from the pub. I remember thinking, people are gonna nick stuff from his house, but I can remember that's the last time I remember being with him when I was still drinking, and he just pulled me out. But it was good. It was such good fun. It was like, imagine if your friends who were good friends at school became really successful, and then you became successful at the same time. Because even though I didn't know them from school, there was absolutely that identification. And then when I read that, I don't think I've read Jim's book actually, but when I read the those first 3/4 of manuscripts of Bob's, when he's describing his childhood and his gang of suede heads hanging around the shops and the sort of playgrounds of like Middlesbrough, it was like, that was very identifiable, of those, especially those hours of just sort of when you're 15 and you can't go to the pub yet, but you don't really want to go to a youth club or it's one, and there's about 2 or 3 years when you're just kicking around, aren't you? I thought they were brilliant. And I think the other thing that's apparent to everybody now is Bob's really funny.
Yeah.
But and he was really funny then.
Yeah.
And he was really perverse and like imaginative. I can remember being with Bob in the bar one night, and Griff Rhys-Jones sat down and he said, "All right, guys, what are you talking about?" We said, like, the benefits of chloroform. We've been talking about hanging around on railway sidings with just fair play to him. Griff Rhys-Jones just joined in, but
I've said it before. I think you see Bob on panel shows like Would I Like You, whatever, and comedians who are usually combative at each other and trying to get one-upmanship, they'll just sit back because they know that Bob's on a different level to what they're on.
Yeah.
And just sit back and enjoy it as punters.
Well, the other guy like that was Sean Locke, wasn't it? And they were mates. I remember seeing Sean Locke out with him at Lee Chapman. Chapman had a club with his wife, Leslie Ash, which was quite a bit. It was called Teatro. And we used to go there quite a lot. It was a good place to go to after the Grouch shot because it stayed open longer. And but Sean Locke was like that. I mean, Bob's just a fucking Elvis, isn't he? He's just a king. I mean, because he is funny. And I went on Alan Davis's chat show where it's called As Yet Untitled.
Yeah.
And I was with a couple of comedians and David Baddiel. Well, David's obviously a comedian as well, but the 2 younger Nish.
Oh, Nish Kumar.
Nish Kumar was on it, and Sharon Horgan, and they had notes. And that was like, wow. I'm just going to tell some funny stories. But Nish had loads of notes. And I remember going another night and seeing just a new talent night when a mate of mine was going to live in America. And he said, "Let's go out for a night." These guys were like students sitting at the back, scribbling all the work out. Simon Amstell's a funny guy as well. But I got a lift back with Simon coming back from Edinburgh. I think I was with Jim and Bob in Edinburgh. And we came back and there was like a strike of train strikes. And I got in a car with Simon and another couple of guys. There were 4 of us crammed in this car. And he was writing stuff. He was writing material in the car going back into London. I'd never seen Jim and Bob do that. They were just funny.
Nowadays,
he was a funny guy, you know.
Yeah, the comics nowadays, younger comics, when you meet them, ones I've met and know, they'll pretty much, when they're off duty, talk about nothing else but their comedy careers. And there's probably the same with bands, but that never happened with Jim and Bob. They'd just go off on all sorts of tangents.
Yeah, chloroform.
Yeah.
Like, you never would know what they were going to talk about. I hadn't seen some of the things they'd done, like the Weekenders or Catrico. And I hadn't really seen those things, but do you remember? Who was it that did those shorts? Was it Heineken or Carl's? But there was a beer company.
Foster's.
Oh yeah, Foster's. Yeah.
And there's a lot of clips of Alan Partridge, isn't there? But the ones that Jim and Bob did with Dr. Shakamoto, that was fucking genius. I rang him up and I went like, "This Shakamoto character." He said, "Oh, I'm not sure we're going to be allowed to do that much more." But I said, "This is like the best stuff you've done for like." I love Dr. Shakamoto. He's from Leeds as well. I think the character's from Leeds, and Bob plays it so straight. It makes Jim even funnier. I thought they were brilliant. I mean, I guess it was just all of those guys. I don't know who else they did apart from
the Fast Show did some as well.
Who did some?
The Fast Show. They did
some. Oh, really?
Yeah.
They must have waved a lot of cash around because they got the cream of the crop, but they also got them doing it properly. They weren't tossing it off. They did really great material. I mean, when you think about it, you mentioned the Fast Show there. There was the Fast Show, Jim and Bob, Father Ted, Mrs. Merton. There was just so many brilliant.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
absolutely. Apart from Carol, I wish I'd put Caroline on the front of Loaded, but all those other people appeared on my magazine covers, and it was just a brilliant time for comedy. And I think as well was around that time after Jerry Sadovitz took me to see Jack, and after I went to see Jim, I was kind of like sort of coming to the last. I was kind of started to know I was getting a bit bored of just interviewing bands. I thought I had more to say than some of them. And I started hunting for more comedy. So I saw Eddie Izzard. I gave him a bad review. I said he's an annoying twat. But that was sort of my northern class prejudice about his poshness. But he fronted me about that on radio, Virgin Radio, a while later. He said, "Are you the James Guy Brown that interviewed me that wrote about me in the NME?" He said, "Yeah, I think we were off air when the record was playing, or whether I don't know if it was on air or not." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "You said I was an annoying twat." I went home, that really upset me. I was thinking about it for ages, and I said, "To be fair, Eddie, I'm pretty sure I wrote you're an annoying twat who was going to go far." And then I just explained it. I said it was just your manner and your sort of public school voice. It wasn't something I was used to, but I did say it was. And then, because I remember seeing Eddie Izzard, I started just going to see Jack. He would do 2 gigs a night, and it would be on for like 5 or 10 minutes. And so you might be at a venue in Hampstead and then go to Balham in the same night. Alan Davis, I saw a place very early on, and I did a piece about him for The Face. And Jim Tavaray, he was on those. He was on those original nights with Jack. He was supporting Jack D. He had a really funny joke. Is he the guy that played the bass?
Yeah, he was. Yeah. He was on my podcast actually.
That's why I thought I'd mention some of the other comedians. But he had this magazine about string
instruments. Yeah.
Basie. I said, "Basie, I found this under your bed. What is it?" And he held this magazine up, and it floated out into gatefold about, Stradivarius violin or something, and it was really funny. It was like like a Playboy centerfold, but with a violin in there. So he was funny. And then the other guy, Nick Revel, I remember seeing him there. But you could see Jim and Nick Revel, not Jim Tavaray and Nick Revel weren't quite as sharp as the others. They were a little bit more sedate. But it was a rich time of going to these venues and seeing all of these people who would go on to be famous, and it was good. It was good. But
people like Harry Hill, when you look at Harry, what Harry was doing back then, how different. Oh man,
he was called Vic Demore. He was a doctor at a hospital in Tooting, and they did a comedy night for the staff. He wasn't called Harry Hill then. He was called Vic Demure, and he was exactly the same, but he didn't have the big white collar. He had a big belt. He came on kind of like a cross between, kind of like a Spiv and Elvis. He kind of like shuffling around. He was brilliant. But he was a friend of Andrew Collins, who was a writer that I got onto the NME.
Yeah.
They were. I don't know how they were friends, but he said, come and see this friend of mine. But it wasn't even a public gig, I don't think. I think it was just a sort of, I don't know if it was a medical school or an actual hospital. It was a big old building in Tooting.
Hello?
Yeah, no, I remember seeing Harry Hill back in the day, and Lee Evans was his support.
Yeah.
When the League of Gentlemen became famous, I knew a couple of them from Leeds. They weren't the performers. Jeremy
Dyson.
Jeremy Dyson, yeah.
Jeremy was in a band called Flowers for Agatha. When I was on a band called the Butter Cookies. And then they'd had some connection with a friend of mine from school who'd first directed their shows. I think they were at a theatre school in Wakefield or something like that. There was a guy called Gordon Scott who was my mate at school. He became a theatre director, and when I met Jeremy, he came up when he said, "I'm in this thing now. I write this thing, League of Gentlemen," and that became big. That was brilliant. I love that.
Yeah.
But I wasn't watching every episode of it. It was just something that when I saw it was so dark. It was so
it got darker and darker, didn't it? As it went on. I think there's talk now of they want to get back together again to do another live tour.
Yeah, I saw them at a theatre on Drury Lane when they were really big.
Yeah. I was there at that one too.
It was a great night. But I met Mark Gatiss at a party for Jim and Bob's agent, PBJ, and it was at the Limelight Club in Shaftesbury Avenue, and I was talking to him and I said, "Do you like Happy Like Murderers?" And he looked at me really, I think it was him and the little one. And they looked at me and they were really shocked. And they said, "Why do you ask that?" And I said, "There's a scene when the bloke who's sort of like the transvestite taxi driver opens.
Barbara.
Yeah, he opens the cupboard and the shot is from the back of the cupboard and you just see all these dildos and vibrators that look like fucking missiles all silhouetted." I said, that scene really made me think of Happy Like Murderers, which was the really good book by Gordon Byrne about Fred West. And they looked shocked. They said, that's absolutely where it came from.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I don't know the names of those characters. I kind of dipped in and out of that, but they were like such a brilliant era. I remember after the first big loaded party, going back to one of the staff's flats in Gloucester Crescent or Gloucester Terrace in Camden, and Ardlo Hanlon was there, and the woman who played Mrs. Doyle.
Oh, Pauline McLean.
And most nights I would go out, I would see people like this around in the bars, either in Filthy McNasty's, which was a good pub in sort of on the edge of Islington and sort of Farringdon area, and then Clerkenwell area, and or in the Grouch, obviously, was full of comedians. But it was a genuinely exciting time. And when people, when the Americans came with Vanity Fair and called it Cool Britannia, a lot of people said, "Oh, that's not really happening," but it was.
Yeah.
It was happening, and what I found interesting was it wasn't just going on in Soho, because when they were taking their tours out, people were enjoying them all over the country. And then when Loaded was doing events around the country, we met all these people, these sort of young entrepreneurs putting on clubs and parties and having bars and or putting their own comedy nights or on. There was a tremendous sense of ambition and possibility and enthusiasm for creative things, for entertainment, for dancing, for comedy across the whole of Britain and Ireland as well, when we go out. And that really was why Loaded was a success, because it was part of that period, where there were very little barriers between the people who were successful in entertainment and the public, and you could clearly see the route that people had taken. It wasn't like Jim and Bob suddenly started behaving like Prince, and they were like locking themselves away and trying to be enigmatic. There was never any pretension to superstardom, and I think that was part of their appeal. You felt like, I guess the audience probably felt like I did when I first met them. They kind of recognised, like, there'd always be 3 kids at school, wouldn't there? It'd be fucking mental. They'd be cider into the science class and throwing books around. I'm thinking about people now at school. I'm thinking about 3 kids that I can remember at school.
Always in trouble.
they were kind of okay, but they were too really dated, and the bullies wouldn't go near them.
Yeah.
Fear of what might happen. They were in their own laboratory of strange behaviour, and I guess was where certainly Jim came from,
Yeah.
and Bob came from that petri dish of youth culture and boredom.
I always think it's fascinating that two people who came from a similar part of the world could come separately to London and bump into each other and have such very similar sense of humours and just gel.
But if you think about it, you were talking about we didn't mention the Goons, but they obviously had that same thing that triggered them each other, and Monty Python as well. But in many ways, how Vic and Bob came together and the attraction and what they created, it was more like a band. Because if you think about Mick, my era, you think about Mick Jones and Joe Strummer.
Yeah.
Or if you think about the era of people who got into music in the noughties, if you think about the two guys in the Libertines, people who came together and created music that connected, that's what they were like. Or if you go back to the 60s and the legends of certainly British music, you'd get a duo that could inspire each other, and that's what they were like. They were more like, their creative process was more like two songwriters than maybe,
I don't know, like Lennon and McCartney, I suppose, even.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm trying to think about duets that had happened before. But when you think about when you see those documentaries about the two Ronnies or Eric and Ernie, they had writers.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, Eric was writing a lot of stuff, and
Eddie Braben,
Eddie Braben's there, right?
In a room, and Jim and Bob never did that. Yeah, it would be interesting to see. I wonder what happened if you put them back in a room. I don't know.
Fingers crossed.
I think it's too easy for Bob now. He doesn't need to go out unless there's £1 million on the table, I imagine. I don't know whether that's... But do you know what I mean? It was like, my girlfriend was saying, let's watch this thing, the thing he did recently, when it was about, they had to make each other laugh.
Oh, Last One Laughing.
Yeah. Last One
incredible.
Laughing.
So good.
I wasn't bothered about it, but it was like, he won it, and he'll probably win this thing with the Traitors.
Yeah.
Because you go back to that sort of, there's different layers, aren't there? But with Jim, you see everything.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
Last time I think I saw you with Jim, or heard you with Jim, was on his podcast with Jules Holland. They did the Joyride.
Oh yeah, Jules Holland, yeah.
Podcast.
What was that?
You did Jim and Jules Holland's podcast, the Joyride. You were a guest on that a couple of years back.
Yes.
Talked about travel and whatnot. That was good.
Yeah, they thought I was a really fearsome editor because they actually saw me chew a writer out at the NME. A guy called Jack Barron walked in when we were doing those singles reviews. That might be why Bob thought I was the editor, because we were sitting in the editor's office. I thought I was the editor and I behaved like the editor, but I wasn't. I was just like, the sparky kid. And this guy came in and he wanted to put Andrew Weatherall on the cover, which if he'd come in advance and said that would have been a good idea. If he'd presented it and said, this is how we're looking. But it was 4 days late. I was really annoyed. I just told him, fuck off. Because they're nice guys. I was like quite brutal young guy, wanting to get everything out on that was whatever. I think that shocked them a little bit because I wouldn't be like that when I was with them. I would just be like laughing, making. I tell you when else, when I just wasn't around them, when they were doing Shooting Stars. When did that start?
95, the first series, yeah. Into the early noughties when it came back, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was never really I wasn't around when they were doing that. It was when in the early noughties I stopped everything and I had a family, I was a kid. Yeah. And kind of life changes when you're doing that. I wasn't drinking as a kid. If you want to do a podcast about 64 Zoo Lane and the Fimbles, give me a call.
It's a matter of time, Jay.
Yeah, that'll come eventually.
In terms of culture, I can remember my mate saying, come and see this new band, the Datsuns. And then somebody else said, let's go and see this band, the White Stripes, and then I saw Yeah's first gig.
Oh my God.
And then it literally stopped. And it was the Fimbles. It was just bizarre. how parenting just changed everything.
Yeah.
And because I didn't drink and I was married, there was the things that drove me to go out in the 90s,
Yeah.
you know, sort of excitement, attention, you know, girls, drink, drugs. They'd be like, you were just fucking walking around with a human being strapped to your chest in a
Yeah.
sort of contraption. And then, like, people would say, "Oh, have you heard the Flaming Lips?" It was like, "No, I haven't." Fucking kids screaming all night, you know. It was just, that was it, really. That was kind of when everything stopped for me.
Yeah. Well, the book is brilliant.
The Arctic Monkeys have a new band.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? My
That's-
my 20-year-old nephew has just discovered the Arctic Monkeys, and you're like, oh my God, this is just, you know,
It's
second
old music.
time around.
Who do you get a lot of? Is there a huge following for their sort of back catalogue?
Yeah, my oldest, sorry, who's 15. He's buying Arctic Monkeys on vinyl. He's
No,
just
Weird.
discovered vinyl.
I mean,
It's weird.
do you
Vic and Bob.
No, I mean, Vic and Bob, is there a big? Do you have a big following of people who are fascinated
Yeah.
by the archive?
Yeah, they're
Oh,
out
yeah.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The
Because I know
anoraks.
you've got your brilliant book, Animal House, which is fantastic. I love the audio book. I love you making yourself laugh in places, which is great.
I made them keep that in. That was a little bit of Loaded, like when I used to break the fourth wall at Loaded.
Yeah.
I
That's
leapt
great.
out of the little cubicle to this young guy called James, who was the engineer, and I said, "Tell the producer to leave that in."
Yeah.
Because what it was, I'd written Animal House over really mainly sort of 80% of it over 2 or 3 years. But some of the earlier things I'd written like 10 years before, like the Acid Awards night. So when I was reading it, when I read the audio book of
Yeah.
you watching this and wondering what the fuck, there's loads about Jim and Bob in it. It's called Animal House, buy it. And if you can, it would be great. Or listen online. But when I was reading that back, that was the first time I'd read the book.
Right.
Because I was writing, I was so far behind. I was writing the final bits. And like we got to the end of it, and the guy that was just proofreading it said, "You haven't mentioned Britpop or any." Well, when that was going on, the world wasn't sort of sitting around going, "Oh, we're in Britpop." You know, it was just. So I had to quickly write, you know, like a long, which is actually one of the best bits in it, I think, when I'm comparing 1984 to 94 and 86 to 96.
Yeah.
You know, the kind of the difference between the conflict in South Yorkshire with the police and the miners' strike compared to, like, you know, what Britain was like 10, 11 years later, and all the comedy and the fun. But I got loads more stories about Jim and Bob.
Well, I know you're working on another project, aren't you? We've going to be lots of the things we've been talking about.
Because I've got loads and loads of pictures and set lists and passes and dummy covers, and I've got letters from people like Helmut Newton, Mark Smith, Morrissey, and Jim, loads of stuff. And they're like, you can't print letters from people if they're alive, but you can. I've just got all of this stuff, so I'm going to do a visual version of it. And we've laid about 60 pages out. It's like a fanzine going back to how I started. And so that's what I'm doing at the moment. And then the publishers are interested in more stories, basically, and the places around the world. And one piece I'm going to write about is when I spent a day in California with Jim and Bob at this really strange place. We had a brilliant day. Bob got into a row with a car. There was a car that spoke to you if you went too close.
It's a Night Rider.
Keep away
Yeah,
from
Night Rider.
It was the car was like threatening Bob. There was no one in it with a car park. So I'm going to write about that. And these we tried to go whale watching and we missed the boat. But we were just there by coincidence at the same time. I'm trying to think when this was. It must have been before Loaded. I was thinking of moving to LA. And in the end, I didn't, because I thought I'm going to stay and do this magazine. So I was over there a lot with Derek, just the photographer. He might be quite good to talk to, because Derek did quite a lot of shots of them for the enemy, I think. Or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe he only did them twice. But I'm trying to think of anything else I can tell you that will rip the veneer of respectability that they have. I can't remember. I mean, for me, it was an exciting time because Loaded was starting, and
Mhm.
it was so successful. It was, and just to reiterate, if you're somebody who is too young or maybe never read them, I did 36 covers and like 5 of them had women on. The rest of them were people like Vic and Bob and Frank Skinner and Gaza and Gary Oldman and Oasis and all sorts of different people, like pop stars and comedians of the day. That was the period when Loaded built its reputation and its name, and it was hugely successful and award winning. And they were very much a part of it. I remember Simon wanting to just come and hang out in the office. I don't know if maybe they'd stopped touring or something, but he didn't have much going on. I said, just come on down. Why don't you come and write for us? Something to hang out in the office. But he was a funny guy. Who else have you had on who's been good?
We've had some big names like Jonathan Ross, Matt Lucas,
We've had
Charlie
Ulrika,
Higson,
Ulrika Johnson, yeah.
But it's also the people like we've had producers, and we had the band from the Big Night Out who used to dress as jockeys on the stage. Those guys on those ones are really interesting because they don't tell their stories anywhere else. Those guys, so they haven't got the usual anecdotes that the bigger names might have. So those guys are
like, because Jonathan,
fantastic.
Yeah,
I can't remember if Bob is in, but Jim used to appear in when Jonathan Ross's Last Resort came back, and it wasn't called The Last Resort. He used to have like a Celebrity Squares thing.
Knockdown Ginger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we used to see Kathy Burke used to come on, and you see Jim and Paul and people like that in those.
And Bob
things.
as Roger Moore.
Yeah, Jonathan's a genius.
Yeah.
I know he was mainly taking his inspiration from David Letterman, but to bring that to Britain, he was brilliant. I found him to be a big inspiration, to have the confidence. Him and Alan Mark. If they hadn't had success with The Last Resort, they probably wouldn't have had a television station to make a television company to make The Big Night Out. They'd had that success. And was Jonathan a producer of The Big Night Out, or was it just? I mean,
just Alan.
No, I don't think so.
I don't remember him being around. Alan, obviously, it was his program, so it was his show, and so he will be around. But I used to love The Last Resort. It was brilliant, and you kind of, because he's so mainstream with the guests, I tend to now only see his ITV chat show on Instagram Reels.
Yeah.
And he has that sort of sense of chaos with Peter Kay, but I absolutely love them. I had
he was great. He was great.
It's Jonathan Ross is almost so successful and mainstream that you don't see the brilliance that's in the cracks.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic chat show host. But if you go back to, he made all of these documentaries about cult film directors and
all the stuff he's really interested in,
and his fascination, his obsession with childhood and but he doesn't do it in a nostalgic way. It's still alive and vibrant for him. His interest in a sort of Americana and toys and Florida and so on. I love him. I think he's brilliant.
Yeah.
He was a big inspiration for me. I think when Loaded came out, it was different because it was confident and it was cocky, and a lot of that came from The Last Resort. There weren't many people that had said, okay, I'm going to do things how I want to do them. So Jonathan Ross was somebody did that. And then Vic and Bob were like that.
Yeah.
There weren't that many examples where you could just be how you were.
Yeah, no, Loaded. It was groundbreaking. Do you know what I mean? Like, as you say, there hadn't been anything like it before, in that sort of that blended the comedy side of things.
Yeah, great times.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, James. It was quite
amazing. Cheers, James.
Thank you all for listening to this edition of Quite a Boast. Special thanks to Matt Lucas for permission to use the Peanuts music as our theme tune, and thanks to Ed Lewis for this edit. Thank you to Jake Chesham for permission to use the photo from his 1995 shoot of Jim and Bob in our various online locations for the podcast. And of course, thank you very much to Jim Moir and Bob Mortimer, without whom this podcast, well, it just wouldn't exist, would it? Remember to check out Paula's Divine Comedians podcast as well, and to join the Reeves Mortimer Depository of Curious Stuff Facebook group. And I think you'll agree that really was a lot of fun. Goodbye.